The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas always reminded me of my life's greatest achievement, not the magna cum laude degree hanging in the study, or the promising career in finance I'd gracefully exited 12 years ago. But this sprawling two-story colonial in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, this was the kingdom I had built. One meticulously planned school fundraiser, and perfectly roasted chicken at a time. My name is Amelia. And for 15 years, I was the devoted and blissfully unaware wife of Marcus Vance. Our life was a portrait of American success. Marcus, with his charismatic smile and custom-tailored suits, was a high-flying management consultant, a rainmaker who traveled the country fixing broken companies. I was the CEO of our home, managing the complex logistics of our two children, Liam and Sophie, with the same precision I'd once used to manage multi-million-dollar portfolios. Our world was one of parent-teacher conferences, weekend soccer games, and quiet, comfortable evenings after the kids were in bed, discussing his latest corporate triumph. It was stable, it was secure. It was, I believed, built on a foundation of love and unwavering trust. I had orchestrated our life to be a seamless support system for his soaring ambition. I left my own career behind without a second thought when Liam was born, trading stock charts and boardrooms for growth charts and playrooms. It was a sacrifice, yes, but one I made willingly. We were a team, Marcus and I. He built his empire in the sky-high towers of distant cities, and I built our sanctuary here at home. But even in the most well-tended gardens, something insidious can take root. The signs were there, of course. They always are, aren't they? You just don't see them until it's too late. His business trips grew longer, stretching from 3 days to a full week. The explanations became vaguer. It wasn't a merger in Chicago anymore. It was just a project out west. Then came the two phones. One was the sleek, company-issued device that sat on the kitchen counter, ringing with calls from his office. The other was a private phone. A slim black rectangle he called his personal line, which he claimed was for keeping in touch with a few old college friends without being tracked by his firm's IT department. It never left his side. I remember one evening, about 6 months before my world shattered. He was home for a rare Tuesday night dinner. He'd missed our 15th anniversary the week before. Stuck on a critical on-site in Denver. He'd sent a mountain of roses, of course, but the apology over the phone had felt rehearsed. As I was clearing the dishes, I found a receipt in the pocket of the travel blazer he'd draped over a chair. It was from a small, expensive-looking boutique, a jewelry store, but it wasn't for the diamond earrings he'd sent me for our anniversary. Those had been ordered online from a major retailer. This was a different purchase, on a different day, from a store in Austin, Texas. He hadn't mentioned a trip to Austin. When I asked him about it, he didn't even blink. "Oh, that," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Had to grab a last-minute gift for a client's wife. You know how it is, Amelia, the personal touch?" I remember nodding, folding the receipt, and throwing it away, a tiny cold knot tightening in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself to trust him. After all, trust was the bedrock of our perfect life. And I had no idea I was living on a fault line. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a Pottery Barn catalog and an alumni donation request. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, heavier than the usual mail, thing with the embossed logo of a private wealth management firm in its corner, the one Marcus had moved his more significant investments to a few years prior. It was addressed to him, but the quarterly statements were my domain. I was the one who balanced the checkbooks, paid the bills, and filed the paperwork. Assuming it was the Q3 report, I slid it open with a letter opener, my mind already on Sophie's upcoming ballet recital. But it wasn't the familiar 4-page summary. Inside was a spiral-bound document, nearly 100 pages thick, printed on heavy, glossy paper. The cover read, "Comprehensive Annual Estate and Asset Review for Mr. Marcus Vance." I'd never seen one of these before. A mild flicker of annoyance went through me. It was just like Marcus to approve some new, overly detailed report without telling me. More paperwork to file. I sat down at the kitchen island, placing the document next to a vase of fresh-cut peonies, and began to flip through the pages. The first sections were standard: summaries of his 401, the stock portfolio I managed, the children's college funds. Everything was in order, the numbers solid. I felt a familiar, quiet pride in our shared success. Then I reached the section titled Insurance and Beneficiary Designations. I saw my name, Amelia Vance, and underneath, Liam and Sophie, listed as the primary beneficiaries for the life insurance policy we'd taken out when we bought the house. All as it should be, but there was a second policy. A newer one, with a death benefit that made me blink. $10 million. I scanned the page, looking for my name again. It wasn't there. My fingers went cold, the glossy paper suddenly feeling slick and foreign. My eyes darted back to the top of the beneficiary box, reading the name printed in crisp, clear type, Isabella Reyes. The name meant nothing to me, but the information below it sent a shockwave through my entire body. A silent, violent detonation in the quiet of my sunlit kitchen. Underneath her name were two others, designated as dependents, Mateo Reyes and Maya Reyes. And then, an address. A condo in a fashionable district of Austin, Texas. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall grew deafening, each tick a hammer blow against my skull. I read the names again. Isabella, Mateo, Maya. A woman and two children I had never heard of were the designated heirs to a fortune I didn't even know my husband possessed. It was a mistake. It had to be a clerical error. A terrible, absurd mix-up, but my hands, acting of their own accord, continued to turn the pages. The denial crumbled with each new revelation. There was a section on real estate holdings that listed a 3-bedroom condominium in Austin, purchased 2 years ago. Outright. No mortgage. There were statements from a brokerage account at a different firm, holding nearly $2 million in assets I had no knowledge of. There was the summary for a credit card, a black card issued by a bank we didn't use. I stared at a line-item breakdown of the previous month's spending. Dinners at trendy Austin restaurants I'd only read about in magazines, tuition payments to a private preschool, purchases from Neiman Marcus, and that jewelry boutique. The one from the receipt. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The peonies on the counter seemed to wilt before my eyes. This wasn't a mistake. This was a second life, documented with the cold, irrefutable precision of a financial statement. This was a betrayal on a scale so vast, so audacious, I could barely comprehend it. The shock was a physical force, a crushing weight on my chest. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal urge to shatter the quiet perfection of my home, to hurl this obscene document into the fireplace. But the scream never came. The tears that pricked my eyes never fell. Instead, something else rose from the depths of my shock. An instinct I thought I had buried 12 years ago beneath layers of domesticity. The analytical chill of the trading floor, the dispassionate focus of the portfolio manager. My grief was instantly cauterized by a cold, clarifying rage. I stood up, walked past the family photos on the mantelpiece, our smiling, lying faces, and went into the study. I powered on my laptop, the screen illuminating my pale, set face. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my best friend. I opened a new, blank Excel spreadsheet. The muscle memory was immediate. My fingers flew across the keyboard, creating columns: asset type, location, estimated value, date acquired, beneficiary. I began to populate the cells, transcribing the data from the report with numb, methodical accuracy. The life insurance policy, the condo, the secret bank accounts. With every cell I filled, the picture of my husband's deception grew sharper, and my own path forward became clearer. This was no longer a matter of the heart. This was a forensic accounting of a 15-year lie. When the spreadsheet was complete, I moved on to the next phase of my investigation. I knew all of his passwords, his frequent flyer numbers, the login to our shared digital calendar. He thought my knowledge of these things was for booking family vacations and scheduling his dental appointments. He never imagined I would use it to dismantle his world. I logged into his American Airlines AAdvantage account. His travel history was laid bare. I began to cross-reference it with the work calendar he shared with me. The pattern was damning. The 4-day marketing summit in Chicago was preceded by a 3-day stop in Austin. The week-long client negotiation in San Francisco had a 4-day weekend in Austin right in the middle. Over and over, for years. The map of his business travel was a web of lies with Austin at its center. He hadn't been having an affair. He had been commuting. I sat back in my leather chair, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The spreadsheet on one side of the screen, the litany of flights on the other. The pain was still there, a deep tectonic ache beneath my ribs, but it was no longer in control. What sat in the driver's seat now was the woman I used to be. The one who never lost a negotiation. The one who understood that in the world of high finance, there is no room for emotion. There is only the audit, the evidence, and the inevitable, brutal correction. The grieving was over. The accounting had just begun. 700 miles away, in a city that pulsed with the energy of live music and relentless innovation, Isabella Reyes believed her life was a testament to modern love. Her world was not one of manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs, but of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Austin skyline. An acclaimed architect with her own boutique firm, Isabella had designed her life with the same bold, clean lines she used for her buildings. Everything had a purpose, an aesthetic, a place, and the center of it all, the load-bearing pillar of her happiness, was Mark. To Isabella, Mark Vance was a force of nature. He was dynamic and brilliant. A man who could command a boardroom with effortless authority, and then discuss the nuances of postmodernism with her over a bottle of expensive Malbec. He traveled constantly. A necessary evil of his high-stakes consulting career. But when he was home, he was home. His focus on her and their 2 children, 5-year-old Mateo and 3-year-old Maya, was absolute. The moment he walked through the door of their condo, his travel fatigue seemed to melt away, replaced by a vibrant energy that filled their home. He would drop his leather duffel bag, scoop Maya into his arms, and immediately ask Mateo to show him the Lego creation he'd been working on. He was, in every sense of the word, present. Their love story, as he had told her, was one born from tragedy. He was a widower. His first wife, his college sweetheart, had been killed in a horrific car accident nearly a decade ago. The loss, he'd explained with a profound, believable sadness in his eyes, had shattered him. It was the reason he was so hesitant to ever legally marry again. "It's just a piece of paper, Izzy," he'd said one night, tracing the line of her jaw as they lay in bed. "What we have, this is real. My heart, my commitment, it's all yours. I just don't think I can ever stand in front of a judge and sign another one of those certificates. It feels like betraying a memory." She had not only accepted his explanation, she had honored it. It added a layer of depth to him, a tragic nobility that made her love for him feel even more protective. She was the woman who had healed his broken heart. Their life together was a partnership of equals, a meeting of 2 sharp, ambitious minds. They would spend hours on their balcony, the city lights a carpet below them, debating everything from urban planning policies to the merits of a new art installation downtown. He was her biggest champion, always encouraging her to take on more audacious projects, to push the boundaries of her design. "You're a visionary, Isabella," he'd say, his voice full of admiration. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." They were a team, building a shared future, raising their bright, beautiful children in a home filled with art, laughter, and intellectual curiosity. What Isabella never saw, what she had no reason to even look for, was the masterful artistry of his deception. The man she knew as Mark was a carefully curated persona, designed for her and for Austin. When he opened his suitcase in their walk-in closet, it wasn't filled with the conservative Brooks Brothers suits and muted ties he wore in Charlotte. Here, he favored tailored Hugo Boss jackets, dark designer denim, and stylish leather boots. He'd swapped his classic Rolex for a more modern Panerai. He was Marcus in Charlotte, the reliable family man. He was Mark in Austin, the sophisticated urbanite. His stories were subtly different too. His anecdotes about his childhood were carefully scrubbed of any mention of the East Coast. His college stories featured a different cast of characters. Friends Isabella had never met but felt she knew from his vivid descriptions. His hobbies were different. With Isabella, he was a connoisseur of modern art. A frequent visitor to the Blanton Museum, and had a budding interest in collecting vinyl from obscure indie bands. In his other life, he spent his weekends coaching Little League and maintaining his prize-winning roses. He was a chameleon, seamlessly changing his colors to blend into the background of whichever life he was currently inhabiting. That Tuesday evening, as Amelia was populating a spreadsheet with the architecture of his lies, Isabella was living inside the illusion. Mark had just returned from a brutal week in San Francisco. He'd brought presents for the children and a rare first-edition book on architectural theory for her. Now, with the children asleep in their beds, they were sharing a meal he'd insisted on cooking. His way of reconnecting after a long trip. "The deal closed," he said, raising his wine glass to hers. "It was a monster, but we got it done. Now I have a whole 10 days clear. No travel. Just you, me, and the kids. We can finally check out that new sculpture park." Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with love for this incredible man. He worked so hard, yet he always made their family his priority. She felt a deep, calming sense of security. Here, in this beautiful home she had designed, with the man who adored her and the children they were raising together, everything was perfect. She leaned across the table and kissed him, completely unaware that 700 miles away, a woman she had never met had just booked a one-way flight to Austin, carrying a folder full of documents that would prove their perfect life was nothing more than a shared, elaborate lie. The phone call to Marcus was the easiest lie she had ever told. Her voice, usually warm and imbued with the gentle cadence of their long marriage, was now a tool, honed to a cool, neutral efficiency. She reached him between meetings, the feigned sounds of Liam and Sophie laughing in the background, a recording she'd played on her laptop providing the perfect auditory camouflage. "Hey, honey," she began, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Just wanted to let you know. Sarah's had a bit of a rough week. I was thinking of taking the kids up to see her this weekend. Give her a hand. A long weekend. Maybe leave Thursday and come back Monday?" Sarah was her sister in Asheville. It was a plausible, even thoughtful suggestion. On the other end of the line, Marcus was predictably supportive. "Of course, sweetheart. That's a great idea. Tell Sarah I'm thinking of her. Don't worry about a thing here. I'll just be buried in the quarterly reports anyway." "Thanks, darling. You work too hard," she said, the irony of physical weight in her chest. "Miss you more," he'd replied, the sign-off as automatic and meaningless as the rest of their conversation. She hung up, her hands steady, her heart beating a slow, cold rhythm. The children were already with her parents, told only that their mother had an urgent business matter to attend to for a few days. The first of many necessary fictions. In her carry-on bag, packed with a single change of clothes and a bottle of water, was a stiff manila folder. It contained printouts of the insurance policy, the property deed, the bank statements, and a framed 5x7 family portrait taken just last Christmas at the Biltmore estate. It was her arsenal. The flight to Austin was surreal. Amelia stared out the window at the patchwork of the American landscape below, feeling a profound sense of detachment. She was not a wife flying to confront her husband's mistress. She was an auditor, traveling to the site of a catastrophic financial anomaly to assess the damage. There was no fear, no anxiety, just a grim, focused resolve. The emotional implosion had already happened in the quiet of her kitchen. This was merely the beginning of the fallout assessment. A taxi took her from the airport through the heart of a city that felt like another planet, all glass towers, funky murals, and a palpable youthful energy that stood in stark contrast to the quiet, established grace of her Charlotte neighborhood. She gave the driver the address, and he pulled up in front of a sleek, modern high-rise that pierced the Texas sky. The lobby was a cool expanse of marble and steel, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and ambition. This was where he lived his other life. This was the set of the second play he starred in. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs as the elevator ascended in whisper-quiet silence. The 27th floor. The hallway was hushed, the air chilled. She stopped in front of door 27B, for a single, fleeting moment. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her. She was about to detonate a bomb in the life of a stranger. A woman who might be just as much a victim as she was. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed the front of her blouse, and pressed the doorbell. She heard the sound of children's laughter and small running feet from within. A moment later, the door swung open. The woman standing there was striking, with intelligent dark eyes, an effortless confidence, and a blueprint tucked under her arm. Behind her, a little boy with Marcus's curly brown hair chased a little girl with Marcus's bright, mischievous smile through a sun-drenched living room. "Isabella Reyes, can I help you?" Isabella asked, her voice polite but questioning, her eyes taking in Amelia's simple, classic attire. Amelia's own voice was preternaturally calm when it came. She had rehearsed this line 100 times in her head. "I'm Marcus's wife," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I believe you know him as Mark." Isabella's friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a mask of cold annoyance. She stepped forward slightly, blocking the view into her home. "I think you have the wrong apartment," she said, her tone sharp. "And I don't know anyone named Marcus. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm very busy." She started to close the door, but Amelia put a hand out, not to stop it, but simply holding the manila folder in the space between them. "Please don't," Amelia said, her voice still quiet, devoid of accusation. "I'm not here to scream or fight. I'm here because you are a beneficiary on my husband's $10 million life insurance policy. And I thought you deserved to know who you're in business with." The mention of the specific amount made Isabella pause, her hand freezing on the door. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by anger. "Look, I don't know what kind of pathetic scam you're running," she hissed, her voice low so her children wouldn't hear. "Are you an ex-girlfriend, is that it? Because let me be very clear. Mark and I are together. You need to leave right now, before I call security and have you thrown out of this building." "I understand why you think that," Amelia said, and she slowly opened the folder. The first thing she pulled out was not a document, but her own left hand, holding it up so the platinum wedding band and the large, square-cut diamond Marcus had given her caught the light. "We've been married for 15 years. Isabella scoffed, a disbelieving, pitying sound. "A ring doesn't prove anything. You're right," Amelia agreed. She reached into the folder again and produced the 5x7 portrait. Marcus smiling broadly, his arm wrapped tightly around Amelia's waist. A younger Liam and Sophie, dressed in matching Christmas sweaters, grinning at their feet, the snowy peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains in the background. She simply held it out. Isabella's eyes locked onto the photograph. The color drained from her face. She stared at the man in the picture, her Mark, but not her Mark. He looked different. Younger, somehow, softer. His smile was the same, but the context was all wrong. Her sharp, architectural mind, trained to see structural flaws, was suddenly faced with a fatal one, in the foundation of her own life. He told me his wife died," she whispered, the words barely audible. "A car crash. Years ago." "She didn't," Amelia said gently. "She's standing right in front of you." The fight went out of Isabella in an instant, replaced by a wave of sickening, vertiginous shock. She stumbled back a step, her hand going to her mouth. Her brilliant, confident eyes were now wide with dawning horror. Amelia pressed the final, irrefutable piece of evidence into her trembling hand. The first page of the estate review. He bought this policy 18 months ago, Amelia said, pointing to the line item. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see my name, and our children's names. On the primary mortgage for our home in Charlotte, the home he sleeps in when he's not here with you. Isabella's eyes scanned the document, her breath catching in her throat. She saw her own name. She saw her children's names. And she saw the other names, the other life, all laid out in the cold, black and white language of finance. The lie was not just a story he had told her. It was a sprawling, logistical masterpiece of deceit. She sank onto a bench in her entryway, the blueprint falling from her arm and unrolling across the floor. A plan for a building that suddenly seemed meaningless. Her children, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stopped their game and came to stand by her side. Looking with curiosity at the strange woman at their door, Amelia stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind her. She looked at the two small children, her husband's children, and felt a pang of something so complicated she couldn't name it. An hour later, the children were asleep in their beds for their afternoon nap. The pristine living room was silent, save for the hum of the city far below. Amelia and Isabella sat on opposite ends of a long white sofa, the folder of evidence lying on the glass coffee table between them like a funeral wreath. The initial shock had subsided into a vast, hollow stillness. They were no longer strangers. They were the two sole inhabitants of a world that had just been burned to the ground, united by the terrible, undeniable truth of the man who had lit the match. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. For what felt like an eternity, the two women sat, marooned in the wreckage of their lives. The sounds from the city below, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic were muted, as if coming from another world. Finally, it was Isabella who broke the stillness. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper. "How long?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the damning documents on the table. Amelia looked up, her own eyes clear but shadowed with a deep, cavernous pain. "I found out this morning. But based on this paperwork, his life with you, it looks like 7 years. 7 years. The number hung in the air between them, obscene in its weight. Isabella let out a sound that was half sarcastic laugh, half sob. 7 years, she repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. We have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. He was with me for 2 years before we even had Matteo. He told me he was building up the courage to love again after his wife died. I've been very much alive, Amelia said, her voice flat. Last May, when he said he had that unavoidable leadership retreat in Napa Valley, Isabella's eyes widened. That was our anniversary trip to Big Sur. He said he'd cleared his entire schedule for a week, just for me. The floodgates opened. It was a torrent. A frantic, desperate exchange of data as they pulled out their phones, scrolling through calendars, text messages, and photo albums. Each piece of information from one life provided the alibi for a lie in the other. Christmas, Amelia said. A new, harder edge to her voice. He told me he had to fly to London for an emergency client meeting. He was gone for 5 days, missed seeing the kids open their presents. We FaceTimed. He was in a hotel room. He was here, Isabella countered, her fingers flying across her phone's screen before she held it up. The photo showed Marcus Mark grinning, wearing a Santa hat, standing next to a beautifully decorated tree in Isabella's living room. Matteo was on his shoulders. The date stamp was the 24th of December. He said his company had given him the entire week off, a reward for landing the Kensington account. On and on it went. A dizzying, sickening litany of his deceptions. The family emergency in North Carolina that had pulled him away from Isabella's firm's award ceremony was the week Liam had broken his arm playing soccer. The quarantined on-site project in Seattle that had caused him to miss Amelia's birthday was the week Isabella and her kids had a terrible flu. He hadn't just lied. He had weaponized their lives, using the genuine joys and sorrows of one family as the cover story to deceive the other. He had woven their two realities together into a single, monstrous tapestry of deceit, with himself at the absolute center. As the full, intricate scope of his manipulation became clear, The dynamic in the room began to shift. The shared shock and grief started to curdle, solidifying into a shared, diamond-hard rage. There was no animosity between them. How could there be? They weren't rivals. They were fellow victims of a master con artist. The enemy wasn't the woman sitting across the room. It was the man they had both loved. The man who, it was now clear, had never truly existed. Isabella stood up abruptly and walked to the vast window overlooking the city, her back to Amelia. She wrapped her arms around herself, her knuckles white. For a long moment she just stared at the skyline, a landscape of ambition and power. "He played us," she said, her voice low and seething with a fury that made the air crackle. "He used my ambition and your stability as diversified assets in his portfolio of a life. He leveraged our love, our homes, our children." She turned around, and any trace of the victim was gone from her face. Her dark eyes were narrowed, blazing with a cold, architectural precision. "Tears and anger are a waste of resources. Crying won't fix this." She took a step forward, her gaze locking with Amelia's. "He has leveraged our lives to build his empire. It's time to liquidate." A profound, affirming stillness settled over Amelia. Isabella had just given voice to the cold, hard conclusion that had been forming in her own mind since she'd first opened that Excel spreadsheet. This was the only logical path forward. "I agree," Amelia said, her voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. She stood and met Isabella in the middle of the room. "But we have to be smarter than him. More disciplined. We cannot be emotional. This can't be a messy, vengeful fight. It has to be a corporate takeover. Silent, swift, and absolute." In that moment, an unspoken pact was sealed between them. They were no longer two separate, shattered women. They were an alliance. A formidable one. Amelia, the cool-headed financial strategist, and Isabella, the bold, pragmatic visionary. The two halves of the perfect woman he thought he could control had just merged into his worst nightmare. They made a vow right then and there. Marcus would never know they'd discovered the truth. Not until the very end. They would go back to their respective lives and play their parts with Emmy-worthy conviction. They would be the loving, unsuspecting wife and the devoted, trusting partner. They would smile, and they would lie, just as he had. But their lies would be weapons. Their grief forgotten, they spent the next 2 hours huddled over Isabella's large drafting table, pushing aside blueprints for a new museum to sketch out a plan for their own form of justice. Their goals were clear, and they listed them on a fresh sheet of drafting paper. First, secure the future for their children. All 4 of them. They would methodically and legally drain every asset he had, and lock it away in trusts that he could never touch. The children were innocent, and they would not pay the price for their father's sins. Second, professional annihilation. His reputation was the source of his power and his ego. They would destroy it. They would gather the evidence of his fraud, because a man this duplicitous in his personal life was certain to be cutting corners in his professional one, and expose him to his firm, his clients, and his industry. Third, and finally, ensure he could never do this again. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. They would erect a firewall of legal and financial consequences so high around him that he would never have the resources or the credibility to manipulate another woman again. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Austin skyline, Amelia packed the documents back into her folder. When she'd arrived that morning, she was a wife seeking confirmation of a terrible betrayal. She was now leaving as a soldier, a co-conspirator heading back behind enemy lines. Isabella walked her to the door. They looked at each other, a deep, silent understanding passing between them. There were no tears, no hugs. They didn't need them. What they had was something far stronger, a shared enemy and a meticulously crafted plan for his demolition. "Fly safe, Amelia," Isabella said, her voice firm. "Play your part, Isabella," Amelia replied. Then she turned and walked down the silent hallway to the elevator, her steps sure and steady. The war had just begun. The flight back to Charlotte was the longest 4 hours of Amelia's life. She returned to an empty, silent house that no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a crime scene. Every framed photograph, every piece of furniture they had chosen together, was now part of an elaborate lie. But there was no time for grief. Grief was a luxury she could not afford. The strategist had taken over, and the first order of business was to assemble her team. She didn't call her old friends from the firm, the ones who would ask too many questions and offer too much sympathy. Instead, she called David Chen, the grizzled, semi-retired head of risk management she had worked under 2 decades ago. He was a man who communicated in facts, not feelings, and whose loyalty was legendary. He answered on the second ring. "David, it's Amelia Vance." She said, her voice even. There was a pause, then a gruff. "Well, I'll be damned. Amelia? Must be 20 years. To what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're finally coming back to the real world." "Something like that," she said, cutting to the chase. "I need a name, David. I'm conducting a portfolio audit of a very complex, very hostile entity. I need a forensic accountant. Not a good one. I need a bloodhound. Someone with the discretion of a priest and the tenacity of a wolverine. A ghost who can walk through digital walls and find things that don't want to be found." David was silent for a long moment. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask who. He simply understood the language of the request. "There's a guy," he finally said, "Arthur Friedman. He's the best. Pulled $1 billion out of thin air in the Apex merger investigation. He operates out of New York. Quiet, brilliant, and costs a fortune. I'll make a call. He'll be expecting to hear from you." "Thank you, David," she said, a wave of relief washing over her. "Amelia," he added, just before he hung up. "Whatever it is, win." Meanwhile, in Austin, Isabella was conducting her own search. As an architect who regularly dealt with labyrinthine contracts, zoning laws, and high-powered developers, she understood the value of superior legal counsel. She wasn't looking for a divorce attorney. She was looking for a warrior. Her research led her to one name, a legendary litigator out of Houston, Genevieve Davenport. Her website bio was spare and intimidating. Yale Law. Former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, specialized in high-net-worth asset recovery and corporate malfeasance. Her photo showed a woman with piercing blue eyes and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. Isabella made the call. She didn't plead or get emotional. She presented her situation to Davenport's assistant, with the cool clarity of an architect outlining a structural problem. "I am one of 2 undeclared spouses of a high-net-worth individual who has created a multi-state fraudulent enterprise using our combined assets. We require counsel for a coordinated, multi-jurisdictional asset seizure. We have preliminary documentation. Our timeline is aggressive and our need for discretion is absolute." 15 minutes later, Genevieve Davenport herself was on the line. 2 days later, the first War Council convened. The meeting took place in the encrypted, anonymous space of a secure video conference. 4 faces, 4 locations, 1 purpose. Amelia was in her quiet, mahogany-paneled study in Charlotte, a portrait of calm domesticity. Isabella was in her stark, modern home office in Austin, a backdrop of steel and glass. Arthur Friedman, the accountant, appeared from a room that seemed to be made entirely of computer monitors displaying cascading columns of numbers. And in the center square, commanding the meeting without saying a word, was Genevieve Davenport. She sat in a high-backed leather chair, a vast law library visible behind her, her expression unreadable. "All right," Davenport began, her voice a low, commanding alto that held no room for pleasantries. "I've read your preliminary briefs. Let's not waste time on the emotional component of the betrayal. That is a given. Let's talk about the mechanics of the crime. Miss Vance, you will begin." For the next hour, Amelia and Isabella laid out the entire story, not as heartbroken wives, but as witnesses presenting evidence. They were calm, factual, and methodical. They presented the timelines, the financial statements, the conflicting alibis. Davenport and Friedman listened intently, interjecting only with sharp, clarifying questions. The Austin property, Miss Reyes. Was it purchased through a trust or in his name directly? The secret brokerage account, Miss Vance. What's the trading frequency? They didn't offer sympathy. They offered analysis. When the presentation was over, Genevieve Davenport leaned forward, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of a predator recognizing a worthy hunt. Ladies, she said, her blue eyes seeming to pin them through the screen. I must commend you on your composure and your thoroughness. Most people in your situation would be paralyzed. You've already done half the work. She paused, letting the compliment land. Now, let's be perfectly clear. What we are discussing is no longer a divorce. His infidelity is a footnote, legally and financially irrelevant. What you have uncovered is a pattern of deliberate, systematic fraud. He has commingled assets. He has used funds from a marital estate in North Carolina to illegally fund a non-marital household in Texas. He has falsified his financial disclosures to both of you. This is not a domestic dispute. This is a criminal enterprise with your lives as the seed capital. The words hung in the digital air, both terrifying and validating. Therefore, Davenport continued, our strategy will not be defensive. It will be an attack. We will not be filing a simple petition for divorce. We will be launching a full-scale financial and legal assault. Our goal is not to get you a fair settlement. Our goal is to prove in a court of law that the vast majority of his assets are the direct proceeds of fraud, making them subject to seizure and punitive damages. It was Arthur Friedman's turn to speak. His voice was the opposite of Davenport's soft, precise, and academic. To do that, I need the raw data, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. What you have is the tip of the iceberg. I need what's underneath the water. He shared his screen, and a checklist appeared. It was their shopping list for the next phase. First, tax returns. I need his personal returns for the last 7 years. Not the joint ones you filed with him, Miss Vance. He will have filed them separately, claiming to be single or widowed to the IRS. That alone is tax fraud, a federal offense. Second, bank and credit card statements. From every account you've uncovered, and any others you can find. I need a complete picture of his cash flow, where every dollar came from and where it went. Third, and this is the most critical, Friedman said, his eyes serious. I need access to his personal laptops. He will have one in each home. A man this meticulous will have a separate accounting software, QuickBooks. Most likely, or at the very least, hidden spreadsheets. That is the ledger of his entire operation. That is where the bodies are buried. Amelia and Isabella looked at each other through the screen. The path forward was now illuminated. It was clear, logical, and fraught with peril. They would have to become thieves and spies in their own homes, operating under the nose of a man who had proven himself to be a master of deception. You will get it, Isabella said, her voice firm. Consider it done, Amelia echoed. Davenport nodded, satisfied. Good, you have your assignments. Maintain radio silence with us unless it's an emergency. And above all, maintain the facade. He cannot suspect a thing. Not until the moment the trap is sprung. The meeting ended, the 4 screens went blank. Amelia sat back in her chair, the quiet of her study a stark contrast to the storm that was now brewing. A moment later, her phone buzzed with a notification from the encrypted messaging app they had set up. It was a single message from Isabella. Phase 1 initiated. Good hunting. Amelia typed back a simple reply. Godspeed. The weeks that followed their first war council were a masterclass in domestic espionage. Amelia and Isabella, living their separate false lives, became operatives in a silent, coordinated war. They moved through their homes with a newfound, hyper-aware purpose. Every loving gesture, a calculation. Every gentle question, a piece of reconnaissance. They were playing the long game, waiting for the perfect moments to retrieve the weapons their team had tasked them with forging. Amelia's opportunity came on a crisp autumn Thursday. Marcus kissed her goodbye at the front door, his leather briefcase in hand. Big conference in Chicago. Ames, he said, adjusting his tie. I'll be back late Sunday. Hold down the fort. Always, she said, smiling the serene, supportive smile she had perfected over 15 years. She even adjusted his collar, a gesture of wifely affection that made her skin crawl. She watched his black sedan pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The moment it was gone, her smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, diamond-hard resolve. The strategist was on the clock. She moved with quiet efficiency, first disabling the internal security camera in the study, a simple task since she herself had supervised its installation. Her target was the large, formidable safe hidden behind a landscape painting of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Marcus believed only he knew the combination. He was wrong. Amelia had watched him open it countless times, her mind effortlessly memorizing the sequence of turns: his father's birthday, her own, their anniversary. A sentimental code for a man with no sentiment. Her fingers were steady on the cold metal dial. Left, right, left. The tumblers clicked into place, and with a heavy thud, the thick steel door swung open. Inside were the expected items. Passports, the deed to their house, some heirloom jewelry, but tucked in the back, inside a worn leather folio she had never seen before, was a stack of documents. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She carefully lifted the folio out and carried it to the large oak desk. Spreading the contents under the bright light of the desk lamp, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. There they were. 7 years of federal tax returns. Form 1042nd. All filed under Marcus's name and social security number. Filing status: single. It was a betrayal so audacious, so brazen, it took her breath away. He hadn't just lied to her. He had lied to the United States government. Year after year. Beneath the tax forms were bank statements from an entity she'd never heard of, the Cayman Trust and Fiduciary Services. The statements showed an account with a balance that fluctuated but never dipped below 7 figures. With wire transfers coming in from a series of vaguely named corporate entities. She didn't take them. She didn't disturb a thing. Instead, she laid each document flat on the Persian rug, stood on a chair to get the perfect angle, and began to photograph them with her phone. Click, click, click. Each shutter sound was a nail being hammered into the coffin of his life. An hour later, every page was digitized. She replaced the documents in the folio, placed it back in the safe exactly as she had found it, closed the heavy door, and spun the dial. The mountain landscape went back on the wall. No one would ever know she had been there. In Austin, Isabella's task was more delicate, a feat of digital surgery. Mark kept a personal laptop in his home office. A sleek, powerful machine he claimed was for side projects and market research. It was protected by a password she did not know. Her moment came late one night, a week after Amelia's successful heist. Mark was fast asleep, worn out from a day with the children and what he surely believed was a loving reunion. Isabella slipped out of their bed, her movements as silent and precise as a cat. In the sterile quiet of his office, the laptop was charging on his desk, its small white light a steady pulse in the darkness. Her own architectural work had made her an expert in more than just building design. She was a master of data management and digital rendering. Months ago, anticipating this need, she had purchased a small, innocuous-seeming device online, a hardware-level disk cloner. It required no password, no software. It simply copied every single bit of data from one drive to another. Her hands, usually so steady with a drafting pen, trembled slightly as she unplugged the laptop and connected the cloner. She attached a blank solid-state drive to the other end and pressed the single button to begin. A small blue light began to blink, excruciatingly slowly. The progress bar on the device's tiny screen seemed to mock her, crawling across at a glacial pace. The clone would take nearly 3 hours. Those were the most terrifying 3 hours of her life. Every creak of the high-rise building, every sigh from Mark in the bedroom, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. She sat motionless in his chair, watching the blinking blue light. A sentry guarding a terrible secret. Finally, the light turned solid green. The clone was complete. She disconnected the device, plugged the laptop back into its charger, and returned the cloner and the new drive, a perfect mirror of his digital soul, to her own briefcase. She crept back into bed, sliding under the covers next to the man whose life she had just stolen. He stirred in his sleep, murmuring her name. And she had to fight every instinct in her body not to recoil. The next day, both women uploaded their treasures to the secure server Arthur Friedman had created. The digital files from Charlotte and the cloned hard drive from Austin flowed through the encrypted ether to a small, cluttered office in Manhattan. Arthur Friedman came alive at night. Surrounded by a constellation of glowing monitors, fueled by black coffee and a relentless passion for finding order in the chaos of numbers, he began to assemble the puzzle. He had the pieces from both sides of Marcus Vance's life, and his genius was seeing the load-bearing walls that connected them. First, he confirmed the tax fraud. Easy. Then he analyzed the Cayman Islands account. The incoming wires were the key. The payment sources were all LLCs, Summit Strategic Partners, Apex Consulting Group, Midstream Solutions. They sounded legitimate, boring even, but when Arthur cross-referenced those names with the data from the cloned laptop, he found what he was looking for. Tucked away in a password-protected QuickBooks file labeled Personal Projects was the entire operation. These were shell corporations, registered in Delaware to a post office box, all secretly owned and controlled by Marcus Vance. Arthur then hacked into Marcus's corporate expense account Child's Play for him and found the corresponding invoices. Summit Strategic Partners had billed Marcus's employer, a major international consulting firm, $750,000 for market analysis. Apex Consulting had billed $1.2 million for logistical oversight. All of the invoices had been personally approved for payment by Marcus himself, and in his capacity as executive vice president. He was billing his own company, using fake vendors he controlled, approving the payments, and funneling the tax-free money to an offshore account. Arthur Friedman leaned back in his chair, a rare, wide grin spreading across his face. He picked up his secure phone and dialed Genevieve Davenport. "Genevieve? It's Arthur," he said, his voice electric with the thrill of discovery. "I hope I'm not waking you." "You are, Arthur, so this had better be good," her voice crackled back. "Oh, it's good," he said, turning to look at the damning flowchart he had just created on a whiteboard. "Our boy isn't just a bigamist. He's a one-man crime syndicate. He's been embezzling from his employer for at least 5 years. We're not talking about hiding a few assets from his wives. We're talking about wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering on a massive scale, Genevieve. This isn't a divorce case anymore, it's a RICO case." The line was silent for a moment. Then, Arthur heard a low, satisfied chuckle from the other end. The stakes of the game had just changed entirely. They weren't just holding the evidence to bankrupt Marcus Vance. They were holding the evidence to send him to federal prison. The time between the discovery and the execution was the hardest. It was a long, agonizing performance on a high wire, with no safety net. For Amelia and Isabella, life became a masquerade. A meticulously rehearsed play where they were the lead actresses, delivering lines of love and affection to the villain of the story, all while secretly plotting his demise. Every day was a test of nerve, every conversation a minefield, every touch a violation they had to endure with a placid smile. Amelia's stage was the warm, inviting kitchen of her Charlotte home. One evening, Marcus was home for a 3-day stretch. A rare gift. He was in an expansive, magnanimous mood, having just closed a massive deal in Boston. He opened a bottle of expensive Cabernet, the one they'd been saving, and insisted on grilling steaks. As they sat at the dinner table, with the scent of charcoal and roses hanging in the air, and the children chattering about their day, he looked at her, his eyes full of what she now knew was a completely performative warmth. "You know, Ames," he began, swirling the wine in his glass, "I was thinking, Our 20th anniversary is next year. Amelia's heart seized, a cold, hard fist in her chest. She carefully placed her fork down, arranging her features into a look of pleasant curiosity. It is, she said, her voice a perfect imitation of her former self. So, I think we should finally do it, he continued, leaning forward with conspiratorial excitement. 2 weeks. Maui, that beachfront villa at the Four Seasons you've had bookmarked for a decade. No kids, no phones. Just us. A dream she had cherished for half her marriage. A dream he was now desecrating, using it as another prop in his elaborate stage play. A bitter, acidic taste rose in her throat, but she forced a bright, delighted smile. Oh, Marcus, she breathed, letting a touch of wonder into her voice. Really? Are you serious? Inside, a voice was screaming, "You monster! You were probably in Maui with her last year and told me you were in a management seminar in Ohio." Asterisk. Absolutely serious, he beamed, reaching across the table to take her hand. His touch was like a spark from a live wire, and it took every ounce of her self-control not to flinch. You deserve it. We deserve it. You've been so incredible lately, honey. So, at peace. It's wonderful to see. She had to plan the details of a fantasy vacation with the man who had systematically destroyed her reality. She talked about snorkeling excursions and reservations at Mama's fish house. Her voice light and full of excitement. She was a ghost at her own table, watching a stranger who looked like her husband discuss a future that would never exist. Each smile was a Herculean effort, each nod of agreement a silent betrayal of the rage that was burning a hole in her soul. Isabella's performance was, in many ways, even more demanding. Her stage was the sleek, modern world she had built, a world predicated on the idea of a partnership between equals. Her greatest test came during his departures. One afternoon he was at the Austin Bergstrom Airport, heading for a 2-day sprint in Chicago before connecting to Charlotte. The audience of two, Amelia and Isabella, knew he was simply going home. Her phone rang, his picture flashing on the screen. She was in a meeting with her team, reviewing the final schematics for a new library. She excused herself, stepping out onto the small balcony of her office, the city bustling below. She took a breath, composed herself, and answered, her voice instantly softening. "Hey you," she said, a warm, intimate smile in her tone. "Hey beautiful." His voice came through the line, smooth as bourbon. "Boarding in 20. Just wanted to hear your voice one more time before I go into the tunnel. I hate when you leave," she said, leaning against the railing, selling the lie with a practiced sigh. "The condo feels so empty without you." Inside, she was a maelstrom of fury. Empty? No, it feels clean. It's the only time I can scrub the stench of your lies out of the air. The only time I don't have to look at your face and pretend I don't want to shatter it. Asterisk. I know, Izzy. I hate it too, he said, his voice dropping. But this is the home stretch on the project. A few more trips, and I should have a clear month. It's all for us, you know that. I know, she whispered. Just be safe. Call me when you land. Always, he promised. I love you, Isabella. I love you too, Mark, she said. And the words felt like swallowing shards of glass. She ended the call and stood for a long moment, gripping the steel railing, her knuckles white. She was a brilliant architect, a woman who built strong, beautiful things from nothing. And every day, she had to act as though she was not living inside a structure whose foundation had been pulverized into dust. Marcus, meanwhile, remained cocooned in his own monumental arrogance. Utterly blind to the silent seismic shifts in his two universes, he saw only what his narcissism allowed him to see. He interpreted their newfound composure, not as the calm resolve of assassins, but as the deep contentment of well-managed women. He marveled at it. To Amelia, over their sham of a celebratory dinner, he'd remarked, I don't know what's changed, Ames, but you're just glowing. That weekend with Sarah must have really done you good. You seem so happy. And in a text to Isabella just after his plane took off from Austin, he'd typed, You're my rock, Izzy. knowing you're there, so strong and happy in the life we've built, makes all this travel bearable. You're my peace. He genuinely believed it. He thought his deceptions were more successful than ever, that both of his intricate worlds were running in perfect, synchronous harmony. He had no idea that the two poles of his empire had formed a secret alliance, and that his serene, happy women were communicating every night on an encrypted channel, cross-referencing his lies and counting down the days. That night, after their respective performances, the brief, coded exchange took place. Amelia. Hawaii was discussed. Anav. Trip. He's feeling confident. Isabella. He's in the air. ETA CLT 2145. Told me I was his piece. Amelia. The audacity is breathtaking. Stay strong. Isabella. You too, the mask is getting heavy. Amelia. I know. But not for much longer. The masquerade could not last forever. The constant, grinding pressure of the performance was taking its toll, fraying their nerves and hardening their resolve into something brittle and sharp. The signal to move to the final phase came on a Tuesday morning, in the form of a secure meeting invitation from Genevieve Davenport. The subject line was a single word: execute. That evening, the four of them convened for the last time before the attack. Arthur Friedman, looking even more energized than usual, spoke first, his screen a dizzying mosaic of spreadsheets and flowcharts. The financial autopsy is complete, he announced, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. The evidence is ironclad. We have documented $4.7 million in fraudulent invoices billed to his employer, funneled through 3 shell corporations, and deposited into an untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We have 7 years of fraudulent personal tax returns. We have a clear, undeniable pattern of criminal activity. From a purely data-driven perspective, Mr. Vance is, to put it mildly, toast. Genevieve Davenport allowed herself a small, predatory smile. And from a legal perspective, she added, Arthur's toast is our 5-course meal. The evidence is more than sufficient to strip him of every asset in the civil suits. It's also more than enough for the U.S. Attorney's Office to secure a grand jury indictment for wire fraud, mail fraud, and felony tax evasion. We are ready to file. Now, we simply need to choose our moment. We need a day of maximum impact. There was a pause as they all considered the timing. It was Amelia, the quiet strategist, who leaned into her camera, her eyes cold and clear. Next Thursday, she said. It's his company's annual shareholder meeting in New York. He's delivering the keynote presentation. It's the biggest moment of his career. He's been rehearsing for weeks. He sees it as his coronation, the moment he unofficially becomes the heir apparent to the COO. Isabella, listening from Austin, immediately saw the brutal, architectural elegance of the plan. The higher he climbs, the harder he falls, she murmured. Davenport's smile widened. Oh, that's just beautiful, she said, her voice full of admiration. Maximum hubris meets maximum humiliation. It's perfect. Thursday it is, V-Day. With the date set, the final preparations began with the swift, silent precision of a military operation. At Davenport's firm in Houston, a team of paralegals began preparing 2 massive sets of legal filings, every known asset, from the Charlotte mansion to the Austin condo, from the joint 401 Cobb to the secret Cayman account Friedman had unearthed, was targeted. Ex parte motions were drafted, requesting that a judge freeze every account simultaneously and without prior notice to Marcus. A corresponding legal team in Raleigh, North Carolina, was put on standby, synchronized to the second with the Houston office. On V-Day, at precisely 9:00 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, both sets of petitions would be filed. A legal pincer movement that would cut off all of Marcus's financial oxygen in an instant. While the lawyers sharpened their knives, Amelia and Isabella worked on their own weapon, the corporate bomb. For several nights, After their respective children were asleep and their shared husband was either traveling or in another room, they met via a secure video link to craft the anonymous email that would be sent to the CEO and board of directors of Marcus's firm. It was a masterpiece of collaborative destruction. Isabella, with her architect's eye for presentation and flow, designed the layout. It wasn't a rambling emotional letter. It was structured like a professional auditor's report. Clean, concise, and devastatingly clear. Amelia, with her deep knowledge of finance, wrote the content. She translated Arthur Friedman's raw data into the crisp, damning language of corporate malfeasance, using terms like fiduciary breach, misappropriation of funds, and systematic billing fraud. Change he stole too. He directed unauthorized payments. Amelia instructed one night, as they edited the draft. We need to sound like an outraged high-level internal whistleblower, not a scorned wife. Good call, Isabella agreed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm embedding links to the scanned evidence directly in the text. A hyperlink on the name of each shell company will open a PDF of its fraudulent incorporation documents. They won't be able to ignore it. They attached the key pieces of evidence. The most egregious invoices, the shell company registrations, the Cayman bank statements showing direct deposits from the fake vendors, and the fraudulent tax returns. The email was a self-contained, irrefutable dossier of his crimes. They scheduled it to be delivered from a secure, untraceable email server at 8 a.m. on V-Day, exactly 1 hour before Marcus was due to take the stage. The final piece of the plan was the most practical. Their own escape. They couldn't be there when the shrapnel started to fly. Using funds from personal accounts they'd had before their marriages, and with the help of Davenport's firm, they each secured short-term leases on furnished apartments in their respective cities. The leases were signed under the names of newly created LLCs, making them invisible to anyone looking for Amelia Vance or Isabella Reyes. The last few days were a blur of clandestine packing. It was a slow, painful exodus disguised as spring cleaning. While Marcus was on a call in his study, Amelia packed a box with photo albums, the children's favorite books, and her own important personal documents, labeling it winter clothes for donation. Isabella, while Mark was at the gym, had a small, discreet moving service vetted and hired by Davenport remove several pieces of art and 3 boxes of personal effects from her condo, all under the guise of loaning them to a gallery. They were taking their lives back, one secret box at a time. The night before V-Day, a profound, electric stillness settled over both homes. The legal filings were queued, the email was armed and scheduled, the go-bags were packed and hidden in the trunks of their cars. All the pieces were on the board, poised for the final, catastrophic move. In her bed in Charlotte, Amelia lay next to her husband, who was sleeping the sound, untroubled sleep of a man who believed he was king of the world. She did not sleep. She simply watched the clock, her mind clear and calm. In Austin, Isabella stood on her balcony, looking out at the city lights. A glass of water in her hand. Her phone buzzed. It was the final communication. A single message from Amelia on their encrypted app. The board is set. The pieces are in motion. Asterisk. Isabella typed her reply, her fingers steady. Tomorrow, the king falls. Asterisk. Vindication Day dawned clear and cold. In a sprawling penthouse suite overlooking Central Park, Marcus Vance adjusted the knot on his silk tie. Practicing his keynote address in the mirror, he looked every bit the corporate titan he was about to become. His speech was a soaring ode to the principles he secretly held in contempt: trust, transparency, and long-term value. Integrity, he said to his reflection, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, is not just a word. It is the bedrock upon which we build our future. He smiled, a confident predatory glint in his eye. Today was his coronation. The shareholders would love him. The board would be forced to acknowledge him as the only viable successor to the COO. He was invincible, the master architect of a flawless life. He had no idea that his life was no longer his own, and that its demolition was scheduled to begin in less than an hour. **9 to 00 a.m. Eastern Street Andard Time, in a quiet law office in Houston. A young paralegal named Maria had her eyes fixed on the atomic clock on her monitor. Her finger hovered over her mouse. "Standing by," she said into her headset. In Raleigh, North Carolina, another paralegal, David, sat poised at his own desk. "Standing by in Raleigh," he confirmed. In the center of their screens was Genevieve Davenport's face, cool and composed. "On my mark," she said, her voice calm. 3, 2, 1, execute. Simultaneously, 2 clicks echoed in 2 offices 700 miles apart. The massive, meticulously prepared legal petitions were electronically filed with the superior courts of Harris County, Texas and Wake County, North Carolina. The digital gears of justice began to turn. Instantaneous e-service notifications flashed across the country to the legal departments of a dozen financial institutions: Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, the Cayman Trust and Fiduciary Services. Automated legal holds, triggered by court order, slammed down on every account bearing the name Marcus Vance. His checking accounts, his stock portfolios, his 401, the secret offshore funds, all of it, in a single silent digital instant, was frozen solid. The financial guillotine had fallen. He was already a pauper. He just didn't know it yet. **9:05 a.m. The second wave of the assault was launched. From a secure anonymous server in Iceland, a single email was dispatched. It landed with an innocuous ping in the inboxes of the 12 most powerful people at Marcus's firm, including the CEO, Jonathan Sterling. The subject line was impossible to ignore. A matter of fiduciary duty, and Marcus Vance's extensive fraud. In his own penthouse office, 60 floors above the conference hall, Jonathan Sterling was reviewing the day's agenda when the email arrived. He sighed, annoyed at the distraction, probably another disgruntled ex-employee. He clicked it open, intending to give it a cursory scan before deleting it, but the tone was different. It was cold, professional, and terrifyingly specific. To the board of directors. It began. It has come to our attention that Executive Vice President Marcus Vance has, for a period of no less than 5 years, engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud the company of millions of dollars through a network of shell corporations. Sterling's blood ran cold. He clicked the first hyperlink, labeled Summit Strategic Partners. A PDF of an invoice appeared on his screen, an invoice for $750,000 that he himself had signed off on. He clicked the next link. A scanned copy of the company's incorporation documents, registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. He clicked another, a bank statement from the Cayman Islands, showing the corresponding $750,000 deposit. His hands shaking with a cold fury, he scrolled through the rest of the email. It was all there. Dozens of invoices, all approved by Marcus. Evidence of wire fraud, scans of Marcus's personal tax returns, where he had illegally filed as single. It was an open and shut case, delivered with the brutal efficiency of an executioner. He felt a surge of nausea as he realized the catastrophic implications. This wasn't just about a rogue executive. This was a corporate governance nightmare. And it was all about to be laid bare on the biggest day of the year. He stabbed the intercom button on his desk. "Helen," he barked at his executive assistant. "Get our general counsel, Elizabeth Reed, in my office. Now. Not in 5 minutes. Now, and cancel Marcus Vance's keynote. I want him intercepted before he sets foot on that stage." Backstage, in the bustling electric atmosphere behind the main stage, Marcus was in his element. He was shaking hands, accepting congratulations in advance, a king holding court before his address. The low rumble of the crowd of 500 shareholders, investors, and analysts was a symphony to his ears. His phone, tucked away in his suit pocket, was on silent. He was blissfully, fatally, unreachable. And now, the announcer's voice boomed through the sound system. It is my great honor to introduce the man whose vision and strategic brilliance have been instrumental in our record-breaking growth this year. Our Executive Vice President, Mr. Marcus Vance. Applause erupted from the hall. This was it. Marcus straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and prepared to step into the warm, adoring embrace of the spotlight. Mr. Vance? A quiet voice cut through his triumphant reverie. He turned. It was Helen, Jonathan Sterling's longtime executive assistant. Her face was a grim, unreadable mask. There's been a change of plans, she said, her voice low and firm. The board needs to see you, now. Confusion, then irritation, flashed across Marcus's face. Now, Helen, I'm literally about to walk on stage. That will no longer be necessary, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. This way, sir. He was led away from the intoxicating glow of the stage, down a series of quiet, carpeted back hallways. His annoyance began to curdle into a vague sense of dread. The walk was silent, the atmosphere growing colder and more ominous with every step. They weren't heading to a pre-show meeting room. They were heading to the executive wing. Helen stopped in front of the main boardroom, a cavernous space reserved for the most important corporate decisions. She opened the heavy oak door and gestured for him to enter. She did not follow him in. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound of chilling finality. The room was vast and silent. At the far end of the long, polished mahogany table sat Jonathan Sterling and the company's general counsel, Elizabeth Reed. Their faces were carved from ice. Flanking the door he had just entered were two stone-faced security guards, their arms crossed, their presence a stark and brutal message, and on the table, spread out like an autopsy, were the printouts. The email, the fraudulent invoices, the offshore bank statements, the evidence of his entire secret life, both criminal and domestic, laid bare under the cold, unforgiving light of the boardroom. Marcus, the CEO began, his voice devoid of all warmth. We have received some disturbing information. He gestured with an open hand at the papers on the table. Marcus stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It was impossible. How? His meticulously compartmentalized worlds had somehow collided in the one place he was supposed to be untouchable. The color drained from his face. His confident posture dissolved, his shoulders slumping as the sheer, cataclysmic totality of his exposure washed over him. Jonathan, I can explain, he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. This is clearly a smear campaign. A fabrication from a competitor. A fabrication? Elizabeth Reed, the lawyer, interjected, her voice cutting like a scalpel. Are these your signatures, Marcus? On the invoices? On the wire transfer authorizations? On the tax returns you filed as a single man? While your corporate benefits package was paying for family health insurance for a wife and 2 children in North Carolina? He had no answer. The bluster, the charm, the entire facade he had built his life upon, crumbled into dust. He stood there, exposed and utterly defeated. A con man whose marks had finally, catastrophically, compared notes. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, Sterling said, his voice flat and final. Your corporate accounts have been frozen, your credentials have been revoked. He nodded toward the security guards. These gentlemen will escort you from the building. Don't bother going back to your hotel. The company card has already been canceled. He paused, letting the final blow land. You should probably find a lawyer, Marcus. A very good one. Marcus didn't speak. He was in a state of shock, his mind a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. He was silently escorted to a private service elevator, bypassing the world he had just tried to conquer. He was deposited onto a quiet side street, a ghost ejected from the machine, left standing on the cold New York pavement with nothing but the expensive, useless suit on his back and the ruins of a life he had so arrogantly believed he could control. The chaos of the New York City street was a pale reflection of the maelstrom in Marcus's mind. Horns blared, people bustled past him, but all he could hear was the slamming of the boardroom door and the final dismissive words of his CEO. For a few disoriented moments, he just stood there. A statue of obsolete power in a $1,000 suit. His first instinct, the one that had guided his entire life, was to regain control. This was a problem, a complex and unprecedented one, but a problem that could be solved. He was Marcus Vance. He solved problems. He pulled out his personal phone, the slim black device that had served as the command center for his 2 lives, and with a shaking thumb, he dialed Amelia. He would fix this. He would be angry, of course, demand to know what she had told his company. But he would smooth it over. He always did. The call didn't even ring. A cool robotic voice came on the line immediately. Asterisk, the number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. Asterisk, he stared at the phone, baffled. Disconnected? That was impossible. It was the landline, the one they'd had for over a decade. He must have misdialed. He tried again, carefully punching in the numbers. The same robotic voice. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of his stomach. Fine. He'd call her cell. He dialed the number he had called 1,000 times. Asterisk. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. Asterisk. The dread blossomed into full-blown panic. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a network error. This was deliberate. His heart pounding, he scrolled through his contacts and found Isabella. He'd call Izzy. She was the logical one. She would tell him what was going on. He pressed the call button. The result was identical. A disembodied voice informing him that the number was gone, as if it had never existed. He stood frozen on the corner of 52nd and Park, the realization dawning on him like a black sun. This was coordinated. This was impossible. This was an insurrection. His training took over. Get home. Get to your base of operations. Asterisk. He flagged down a taxi. The familiar entitlement still clinging to him like a phantom limb. JFK, he barked, sliding into the back seat. American Airlines Terminal. And step on it. The entire ride. He was a whirlwind of frantic, useless activity. He tried to log into his company email. Access denied. Asterisk. He tried to log into the corporate travel portal. Your credentials have been revoked. Asterisk. He tried to call his executive assistant. The call wouldn't go through. He'd been blocked. Every digital door he had ever held a key to had been slammed shut and bolted from the inside. He arrived at the airport, his panic masked by a thin veneer of indignation. He strode to the first-class check-in counter, pulling out his company's exclusive, high-limit Amex card. A one-way ticket to Charlotte. First available flight, he demanded. The ticketing agent, a polite but weary-looking woman, typed for a moment. I'm sorry, sir, she said, not looking up. This card has been declined. What? Marcus snapped. That's impossible. Run it again. She did. Declined again, sir. Do you have another form of payment? Annoyed. He pulled out his personal black card. The one tied to the secret accounts. The one with no limit. Try this. She swiped it. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. This one is also declined, sir. It says the account has been suspended. He could feel the eyes of the people in line behind him. His face grew hot. This was a nightmare. He fumbled for his wallet, pulling out the debit card linked to his and Amelia's joint checking account, his last resort. Here. Just run this. The agent ran the card. She looked at her screen, then up at him with an expression of faint pity. I'm sorry, sir. Insufficient funds. Insufficient funds? They had a rolling balance of at least $50,000 in that account. Stunned and humiliated, he stumbled away from the counter, ignoring the impatient sighs from the line behind him. He found a relatively quiet corner, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold his phone. He opened his primary banking app, the one he checked every morning, the one that always showed the healthy, reassuring numbers of his success. The app loaded. For a moment, he saw the familiar balances, the long rows of digits. Then, the screen refreshed, and the numbers vanished. replaced by a string of zeros and a single brutal phrase in red next to each account. Frozen. By order of the court. Asterisk. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the polished terminal floor. It was all gone. Every penny. He was stranded. Jobless, creditless, and utterly, completely penniless. He wandered the terminal for what felt like hours, a ghost in a bespoke suit. He was a machine with no power. A king with no kingdom. A man whose entire identity had been built on a foundation of money and control, both of which had been vaporized in the span of a single morning. His mind raced, trying to find a move, a strategy, an angle. But every path was a dead end. He was trapped, and he didn't even know who had built the cage. Just as he was about to sink into a pit of pure despair, his phone buzzed. He picked it up from the floor. A text message from an unknown number. It contained no greeting, no explanation, just a name and a number. Direct all inquiries to Genevieve Davenport, phone number, asterisk. A lifeline. A path to information. He didn't recognize the name, but it was the only lead he had. He ducked into a noisy airport bar, found a corner booth, and with the last of his composure, dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered. Davenport Law. I need to speak to Genevieve Davenport, Marcus said, trying to inject an authority into his voice that he no longer possessed. My name is Marcus Vance. One moment, he was put on hold for less than 10 seconds. Then, a new voice came on the line. It was a woman's voice. Calm, controlled, and as cold as a morgue slab. This is Genevieve Davenport. Miss Davenport, Marcus began, ready to unleash a torrent of threats and demands. I don't know who you are, but I demand to speak to my wife, Amelia Vance, and my partner, Isabella Reyes. My accounts have been illegally frozen, my career has been sabotaged, and Mr. Vance. The voice cut him off. The interruption as clean and sharp as a scalpel. Let me be concise, as I assume your time is now significantly less valuable than mine. I am the sole legal counsel for both Miss Amelia Vance and Miss Isabella Reyes. The words hit him like a physical blow. Both of them. Asterisk. Your assets, the voice continued, utterly devoid of emotion, have been legally and appropriately frozen pursuant to ex parte court orders issued this morning in the states of North Carolina and Texas. We have filed 2 separate civil suits against you on behalf of my clients, seeking damages for a decade-long pattern of extensive financial fraud. He tried to speak, to protest, but he couldn't form words. Furthermore, she went on, her voice dropping a fraction, I feel it is my professional obligation to inform you that a comprehensive file detailing your embezzlement and money laundering activities against your former employer has been turned over to the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Therefore, I strongly suggest you conclude this phone call and retain criminal counsel immediately. There was a click, and the line went dead. Marcus sat in the noisy, indifferent bar, the phone still pressed to his ear, jobless, penniless, homeless, and now, facing federal prison. The full, terrifying and catastrophic scope of his implosion finally crashed down on him. This wasn't a problem to be solved. This was a checkmate. A flawless, perfectly executed checkmate, delivered by the 2 women he had underestimated most in the world. He slowly lowered the phone, slid down in the booth, and for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Vance had absolutely no idea what to do next. 1 year later, the world was a different place. The aftershocks of V-Day had long since subsided, leaving behind a landscape that had been irrevocably altered. The name Marcus Vance was no longer whispered in the hallowed halls of finance. It was a cautionary tale, a footnote in court documents and business ethics case studies. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence presented by a federal prosecutor who saw a slam-dunk case, Marcus had taken a plea deal. He was convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and felony tax evasion. He was now an inmate at a medium-security federal correctional institution in West Virginia. His bespoke suits traded for a standard-issue jumpsuit, the divorce settlements, which were finalized with breathtaking speed in the wake of his criminal conviction, had been overwhelmingly, almost entirely, in favor of Amelia and Isabella. The courts, presented with clear evidence that his entire fortune was built on a foundation of criminal activity and fraud perpetrated against his own families, had systematically stripped him of everything. The contents of the secret Cayman account were seized and awarded as punitive damages, split evenly between the two women. But this new world was defined not by his absence, but by the powerful presence of the two women he had so catastrophically underestimated. Amelia Vance had come back to life. She had rediscovered the sharp, intuitive financial mind she had put on a shelf for 15 years, but she returned to the field on her own terms. She founded the Vance Advisory Group, a boutique financial planning firm with a very specific mission: empowering women navigating complex life transitions. Her clients were not corporations. They were recent widows, divorcees, and women who, like her, had woken up one day to find the financial ground shifting beneath their feet. Her office, located in a beautifully restored historic building in downtown Charlotte, was warm and inviting, filled with comfortable chairs and modern art. She didn't just give financial advice. She gave her clients back their confidence, their independence, and their futures. Isabella Reyes, already a force in her own right, had expanded her empire. Reyes Architecture plus Design had flourished, landing 2 major municipal contracts that had elevated her firm to national recognition. But her most significant move was a strategic and deeply personal one. She had opened a second office. In Charlotte, North Carolina, the move was brilliant from a business perspective, giving her a foothold in the booming southeastern market. But its true purpose was to bridge the 700 miles that had once separated their two families. It was a move that allowed their children, 4 brothers and sisters of circumstance, to grow up not as the fractured legacy of a liar, but as a new, unconventional, and deeply loving family. They were, to the rest of the world, cousins. They met for their now regular Tuesday lunch at a bright, airy bistro, halfway between Amelia's office and Isabella's new Charlotte studio. The tension and secrecy of their first meetings were a distant memory, replaced by the easy, shorthand familiarity of true friends and trusted business partners. "The financing for the Morrison Place project is secured," Amelia said, sliding a folder across the table as soon as their iced teas arrived. "The rates are even better than we projected. Your design proposal blew the lender away." Isabella opened the folder, but her eyes were on Amelia, a warm, genuine smile on her face. "That's because your financial modeling was airtight. They knew it was a winning bet before they even saw the blueprints." She pushed the folder back. "So, are we celebrating a done deal? Or are you going to make me read the fine print first?" "We can celebrate," Amelia laughed, a sound that was lighter and more frequent these days. "To Morrison Place, our first joint venture." They clinked their glasses. The project was a perfect fusion of their talents. A stunning mixed-use development on a neglected block downtown, designed by Isabella's firm and entirely financed and managed by Amelia's safe. They were taking something broken and ugly, and building something strong, beautiful, and profitable in its place. The symbolism was lost on neither of them. Their conversation shifted seamlessly from business to family. "How did Liam's soccer tournament go?" Isabella asked. "Mateo was disappointed he couldn't go. He thinks his big brother is a professional athlete." "He was the star, of course," Amelia said with a proud smile. "Scored the winning goal. He wants to know when Maya is coming for another art lesson. I think he has a little crush. She's already packing her paintbrushes." Isabella chuckled. "She and Sophie have some elaborate plan to redecorate the guest room. Apparently my design choices are too beige." They laughed, the sound easy and unburdened. They were no longer navigating the wreckage. They were cultivating a garden. The 4 children, once the separate, secret anchors of 2 false lives, were now a boisterous, happy, and thoroughly blended clan. They spent holidays together, alternating between Charlotte and Austin. They FaceTimed constantly. They were cousins. And their bond was, in a strange way, the most profound and unexpected vindication of all. They had taken the greatest trauma of their lives and spun it into a web of love and support for their children. As their food arrived, Isabella grew quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting out the window. "Does it ever feel surreal to you?" she asked softly. "That just over a year ago we were strangers, sitting in my living room in stunned silence?" Amelia followed her gaze. "Every single day," she admitted. "Some days, it feels like a lifetime ago. Like a story I read about someone else. Other days, I can still feel the chill of that room." She took a sip of her tea, her expression thoughtful. "But then I look at what we're building, this project, our businesses, this family, and I know it was real. We didn't just survive it, Izzy. We repurposed it. It's the foundation for everything we have now." Isabella nodded, her eyes shining. "He thought he was the architect," she said. "But he was just the demolition crew. We're the ones who are building." They finished their lunch, their conversation turning back to interest rates and zoning permits. Two queens in their new, shared kingdom. As they walked out of the restaurant and onto the bright, sunlit street, they paused on the sidewalk. "I'll see you Saturday?" Amelia asked. "Liam's birthday party. The kids are demanding a bouncy castle. We wouldn't miss it for the world," Isabella said, giving her a quick, warm hug. "Tell the birthday boy his favorite architect has a very special present for him." They parted ways. Amelia heading back to her office to empower another woman. Isabella heading to her studio to design another beautiful space. They were no longer defined by the man who had wronged them or the lies he had told. They were defined by the businesses they had built, the children they were raising, and the extraordinary friendship they had forged in the fires of his betrayal. They had taken the ruins of his collapsed empire and from them, built a new one, together. And this one was real. Marcus Vance built his life like a house of cards, believing he was the only one who knew the rules of the game. He saw his two families as separate, successful hands to be played, never imagining that the two queens in his deck would decide to leave the table, take the entire pot, and buy the casino. He never imagined they would rewrite the rules entirely. He saw them as separate assets to be managed, but together, they became a force he could never have anticipated. In the end, they didn't just take everything he had. They built something far greater from the ruins, a testament to the fact that the most powerful alliances are often forged in the fires of betrayal.